Part 2. Riches. Chapter 1. On the Road. It was autumn, and darkness and night were rising up the highest mountains of the Swiss Alps, and at last came to the walls of the great old castle. A line of horses walked slowly up the steep, narrow path, led at the front by two guides who spoke to each other as they walked. There was no talking among the riders. Two grey-haired gentlemen, two young ladies, and their brother, who were quietened by the sharp cold and the exhaustion of the journey. At last, they arrived at the castle door and hurried into the building. When they had seen their rooms, the Dorrit family came downstairs, where a bright fire shone red and high. A stranger was sitting near the fire, pulling at his black moustache. He had a long nose and strange, frightening eyes. "Are you on your way to Italy, sir?" the stranger asked Mr. Dorrit.
"Yes," Mr. Dorrit replied. "We are visiting the castle just for tonight and return tomorrow to our hotel in Martigny. From there, we continue to Italy."
"Ah, yes," said the stranger. A servant came to tell them that dinner was ready, and the Dorrits moved through into the dining room. As they passed the stranger, little Dorrit held her father's arm closely, trying to hide how much she trembled. With that high nose and those eyes that were too near it, he was particularly disagreeable to her. He got up to follow them and looked at the guest book, which lay open on the table. There he read, "William Dorrit, Frederick Dorrit, Edward Dorrit, Miss Dorrit, Miss Amy Dorrit, from France to Italy." Then, in small, complicated writing, he added his own name, Rigaud, Paris. The sun was warm as the travellers came down slowly from the mountains and found themselves once more among the green fields, rocky rivers, and little wooden houses of the Swiss countryside. When they arrived at their hotel at Martigny, the hotel owner rushed out, hat in hand, apologizing endlessly. He wished he had not allowed it, he said, but a very important lady had begged him to let her and her son have their lunch in the Dorrits' rooms. They had promised to be very quick, and their coach was ready, but they had not yet gone. Mr. Dorrit's anger rose higher and higher as he heard these apologies. He felt that the family dignity had been attacked. "1,000 apologies," the hotel owner said again. "Please do not be angry, sir. If you could possibly use another dining room for just 5 minutes, the man begged. "No, sir," said Mr. Dorrit, full of heat. "I will not go into your hotel. I will leave without drinking or eating or stepping inside. You have insulted me. How dare you?" At that moment, a man came out into the yard with a lady. "My apologies," said the rather heavy young gentleman. "The lady, my mother, is extremely anxious to avoid an argument." The lady came forward.
"Edmund, I hope you are explaining that it is all my fault," she said loudly. "The hotel owner is not to blame." She walked slowly towards Mr. Dorrit. "I promised this man that we would be gone before you came back, but I had no idea that you would return so soon. I do apologise, and hope you will forgive the owner."
The lady was Mrs. Merdle, and her husband, Mr. Merdle, was extraordinarily rich. He was in everything, from banking to building, and he turned all he touched to gold. All the best people in London, lawyers, doctors, politicians, government officials, wanted to know Mr. Merdle. Mr. Dorrit made a polite reply and said that what he had first seen as an attack on his dignity, he now recognized as an honour. Hearing this, the lady smiled winningly. "Are you on your way to Italy?" she asked. "Yes, madam," replied Mr. Dorrit. "We have just returned from a 2-day excursion into the mountains, and from here we continue to Italy." "My son and I are also going to Italy," said the lady. "Perhaps we will have the pleasure of seeing you again there." Mrs. Merdle's first husband had died a few years before, and Edmund Sparkler was her only son. He showed so little intelligence that some people said he had fallen out of a high window as a baby and landed on his head. He had asked any number of unsuitable young ladies to marry him, and was standing now staring at Miss Fanny Dorrit, as his mother tried to take his arm. She almost had to pull him into their coach, and he continued to stare back through the window until the coach disappeared. As the family travelled on through Italy, little Dorrit felt more and more that her present life was like a dream. All that she saw was new and wonderful, but it was not real. She felt that the pretty countries she saw from the window of the coach might disappear at any moment, and that, turning a corner, they might stop suddenly at the old Marshalsea gate. They arrived at last in Venice, where they were to stay for some months in a palace on the Grand Canal. To little Dorrit, Venice was more unreal than anywhere else, with its streets made of water and the stillness of the days and nights that was broken only by the sound of bells and the cries of the gondoliers. The family began a busy life, going here and there, but little Dorrit asked only to be left alone. It was strange to have no work, no one to care for, nothing to plan. But strangest of all was the distance between her and her father. When she tried to take care of him, as she always used to, he reminded her that she was a lady now, who should behave with dignity. She often wanted to put her arms around his neck and tell him how she loved him, but she knew that he would not like it, and that Fanny would be angry. She spent a lot of time now with her Uncle Frederick. He had begun to visit art galleries and spent hours looking at the pictures, wiping his old blue nose. Little Dorrit had found him at a gallery one day, and after that she often joined him. He carried a chair for her, from picture to picture. He stood behind her, not speaking, but clearly happy to be with her. Sometimes little Dorrit stepped into a gondola and went all over that strange city in her quiet, scared, lost manner. She looked into other gondolas, almost hoping to see the faces of the dear friends she loved. But her favourite place was at the window of her own room, where in the evenings she watched the sun going down, purple and red, shining on the walls. She watched the stars appear, and she thought of the old prison. The Dorrits had been in Venice for a month or two when Mr. Dorrit sent for his youngest daughter.
"Amy," he began, "I feel that you don't seem at home here. Why is this?"
"I think, Father, I need a little time."
"You disappoint me. I am not pleased with you. You need to behave in the right way and do what someone in your position should."
"I'm sorry that you have not been pleased with me, dear Father," said Little Dorrit. "I will try, more than ever, to fit into this new world around me."
"You continue to hurt me. There are some past events which I wish to forget. Your sister understands. Your brother understands. Everyone understands. Except you. You, Amy, constantly remind me of the past, though not in words."
He looked down at Little Dorrit, who had put her hand on his arm. Her head was down, and he could not see her face, but her touch was soft and quiet, and there was only love in her sad little figure. He began to cry quietly, then said he was a hopeless old fool, even with all this wealth, and took her in his arms. But his tears were soon dried. With one remarkable exception, this was the only time in his life of freedom and fortune when he spoke to his daughter, Little Dorrit, of the old days. Little Dorrit had been out with her sister one afternoon, when, as they came back to the hotel by gondola, she noticed that another gondola was following them. Fanny opened the window near her and watched as the other boat came up beside them.
"Did you ever see such a fool?" Fanny said, laughing.
"Who is it?" Little Dorrit asked.
"How slow you are," said Fanny. "Mr. Sparkler, of course."
Little Dorrit was silent for a moment, and then she asked, "Are you going to encourage Mr. Sparkler, Fanny?"
"I shall make him do what I want, my dear. I shall make him fetch and carry for me."
"But, dear Fanny, where do you think that will lead?"
"I haven't thought that far ahead yet," said Fanny.
They climbed out of the gondola and walked up to the hotel, where Mr. Sparkler joined them.
"Good day, Mr. Sparkler," said Fanny. "I do hope your mother is well."
"Thank you," said Mr. Sparkler hesitantly. "She is very well."
"Is she here in Venice?"
asked Fanny. "No, in Rome," Mr. Sparkler answered. "I'm here by myself. I came to call on Mr. Edward Dorrit. In fact, on the family." Turning politely to the hotel servants, Fanny asked whether her father and brother were in. Then, hearing that they were both at home, she took Mr. Sparkler's arm and went with him upstairs to the Dorrits' grand rooms. Chapter 2. A Letter from Little Dorrit. Daniel Doyce had been asked to go and work abroad for a while, and before he went, Arthur went through the business papers with him.
"It's all in perfect order, Arthur. It couldn't be better."
"Now, about the management of our money while you're away," began Arthur. His partner stopped him.
"You will continue in all matters to make decisions for both of us. I have perfect trust in you."
With Doyce gone, Arthur's life had little variety. He worked every day at Bleeding Heart Yard. Mr. and Mrs. Meagles had gone abroad themselves, travelling, and they had asked him to make sure their house was looked after while they were away. So visits to their house in Twickenham and to his mother's home were the only changes in his routine. He sadly and sorely missed little Dorrit. He had been prepared to miss her, but not so much. A large place in his life had been left empty when she went out of it, and he was lonely and felt suddenly that he was getting old. He had climbed a hill, gone over the top, and was going down quickly. He would always be alone, he could see. The day when he could fall in love was gone and would never shine again. When he received a letter from little Dorrit, he was greatly moved, but saw at once that her kind thoughts for him were now a secret from her family. The Dorrits had turned against him, as they had turned against everything from their prison days. Dear Mr. Clennam, I write to you from my own room in Venice, hoping that you will be glad to hear from me. We are all quite well. You will be pleased, I am sure, to know that my father's health is very good. He is very different indeed from what he used to be. Fanny, too, is much changed. She gets kinder every day and is so patient. She has very quickly become used to our new fortunes. She is a natural lady. But I have not been able to, and sometimes I think I never will. We have been in many wonderful places and have seen many wonderful sights. But everything in my life is so strange, and I miss so much. I think all the time of home. I wish I knew, but I must ask you not to write to me, how Mr. Plornish is. I love so dearly the place where I was poor, and where you were kind to me. Oh, so dearly. And I must share one last thought with you. Ever since I have been away, I have been afraid that you may think of me in a new light, or a new character. Please never think of me as the daughter of a rich person. Remember me only as the shabby little girl you helped so kindly. I hope that you sometimes, in a quiet moment, have a thought for me. Your ever grateful, little Dorrit. Arthur had been working late a lot, and spending time in the waiting rooms of the circumlocution office, trying again to interest people in Doyce's invention. He was feeling tired and lonely, so on the day he received little Dorrit's letter, he visited Mr. Plornish to give him her news, and then went to find Panks, who was puffing and blowing in the yard. "Come home with me and share my dinner," said Arthur. "I'm tired and miserable tonight. Mr. Doyce has gone to work abroad, and I am quite alone." Panks and Arthur had become friends since the Dorrits' departure from London, and they often talked of little Dorrit and her goodness. The two men walked home to a dinner of bread and soup, served on a little table in front of the fire. Mr. Merdle's name was on Panks's mind that evening. "Merdle, Merdle, everyone is talking about him. The wealthiest banker in the city," said Panks. "I've looked into it. Putting money in Merdle's bank makes sense. It's a safe way to become rich." "Do you mean, my good Panks, that you would put £1,000 of yours, say the £1,000 that Mr. Dorrit paid you for discovering his inheritance, in Merdle's bank?" asked Arthur. "Yes, indeed. I've already done it," said Panks, looking wisely at Arthur. "Merdle is a man of enormous wealth. He has great influence with the government. His bank is safe." "Well, said Arthur, looking at Panks and then at the fire. "You surprise me."
"Don't say that, sir," replied Panks. "It's what you ought to do yourself." "Is it you who manages the money in your business with Daniel Doyce?" "Yes, as well as I can." "Manage it better, sir. Reward him for his hard work and disappointments. You can make a lot of money if you put some into Myrtle's bank. Go in and win."
"But what if I go in and lose?" asked Arthur uneasily.
"You can't," said Panks. "Myrtle's name is everywhere."
The two men spoke little more after this, but the next day Arthur thought again and again about what Panks had said. He thought how much he would enjoy making Doyce a little wealthier. He thought about how he saw or heard the name of Myrtle everywhere. He began to think it was interesting, too, that everyone seemed to trust this man. One evening, a few weeks later, Arthur left his rooms at about 9 o'clock and slowly walked in the direction of the cold home of his childhood. He had turned into the steep, narrow street when a man walked quickly up behind him and came past so close that Arthur was pushed against the wall. Arthur arrived at his mother's house and was surprised to see the same man there, looking up at his mother's window and laughing to himself. He was a strange man, with a high nose and a black moustache, and his eyes had a cruel, false expression. He wore a long, heavy cloak, and he looked like a man who was travelling. The man went up to the door and knocked at it.
"No! You again?"
Affery cried out as she unlocked the door. "Me again, dear Mrs. Flintwinch," said the man. "Open the door, beautiful Mrs. Flintwinch. Let me go upstairs and see the lady. And fetch Mr. Flintwinch. Tell him that Rigaud has just arrived in England." The stranger walked inside, and Arthur, who had come up behind him, followed him into the house. "Tell me, Affery," said Arthur, looking angrily at Rigaud from head to foot, "who is this gentleman?" The voice of Mrs. Clennam called from upstairs.
"Affery, let them both come up. Arthur, come straight to me."
"Arthur," said Rigaud, taking off his hat. "The sun." His nose went down and his moustache went up in an ugly smile. Arthur did not answer. He went upstairs to his mother's room, and Rigaud followed him. "Madame," said Rigaud, sitting down, "perhaps you would introduce me to your son? It appears that I do not please him."
"Sir," said Arthur, "whoever you are, if this were my house, I would not hesitate to put you outside it."
"But it is not your house," said his mother, without looking at him. "The gentleman came here before," she went on, "with a letter from a trusted agent in Paris. I do not know why the gentleman has come again, but I'm sure he will explain when Mr. Flintwinch returns, and I'm sure it will be a simple business matter." "We shall see, madame," said the man. As they talked, Arthur noticed that Mrs. Clennam's manner and voice were under control, but that she never took her eyes off Rigaud's face and listened carefully to every word he said. Mr. Flintwinch knocked at the door and came into the room, and Rigaud got up from his chair, laughing loudly. He wrapped his arms around the old man.
"Ah, Flintwinch," he cried. "How are you, my good little boy?"
He clapped his hand hard on Mr. Flintwinch's back, then pushed him roughly away and sat down again. As Arthur watched in astonishment, his mother turned towards him.
"Please leave us to our business, Arthur," she said.
He bent down to kiss her and felt that her face was even colder and harder than usual. "Affery," whispered Arthur as he went downstairs into the dark hall. "What's going on here? I want to know what is wrong. I want some light thrown on the secrets of this house." The old servant stood in the dark with her apron thrown over her head.
"Don't ask me anything, Arthur. There's noises in this house that frighten me. Noises, tremblings overhead, tremblings underneath."
"But those are not all the secrets. I beg you to tell me more. Tell me about that foreign man, Rigo."
"The first time he came here, he heard the noises himself, and he was shaking," said Affery.
"But what does he want, Affery?" said Arthur. "What is the mystery that surrounds this house?"
"I don't know. Don't ask me anything, Arthur. Go away."
Arthur went out and Affery shut the door. As he looked up at the dark windows of his mother's room, they seemed to repeat, "Don't ask me anything. Go away." Chapter 3. The Myrtles. From Venice, the Dorrits travelled on to Rome, and soon after they arrived there, they received a visit from Mrs. Myrtle.
"I'm delighted," she said, "to meet you once again, after our unfortunate misunderstanding at Martigny. And I must thank Mr. Dorrit for making my son Edmund's stay in Venice so agreeable. I believe he was invited to your hotel several times." "I was pleased," said Mr. Dorrit, "to show how greatly I, with the rest of the world, respect Mr. Myrtle's character. I have been disappointed to hear from Mr. Sparkler that Mr. Myrtle has no plans to come abroad." "Why, indeed," said Mrs. Myrtle. "He's so very busy and wanted by so many people, I fear he cannot. He hasn't been able to get abroad for years." "I hope, however," Mr. Dorrit went on, "that if I do not have the honour of meeting Mr. Myrtle on this side of the Alps, I shall have that honour when I return to England. I would be delighted to meet him." "Mr. Myrtle," said Mrs. Myrtle, who had been looking admiringly at Fanny, "will, I'm sure, be just as delighted." News soon spread in Rome that Mr. Sparkler now had a position in the Circumlocution Office. The Barnacles, wanting to please Mr. Myrtle, had given young Sparkler a job. Mrs. Myrtle received congratulations from her friends in Rome. She hoped that Edmund would like the job, she said, but really she did not know. It would keep him in town a lot, and he preferred the country. But it was not a disagreeable position, and it was probably best that he should have something to do. Miss Fanny was now in a difficult position. It was widely known that she was the lady whom Mr. Sparkler admired. She could not decide whether to get rid of him or whether to encourage him more, and she came home one night anxious and upset from a party at Mrs. Myrtle's house,
and went to little Dorrit's room.
"Things cannot go on the way they are," she cried,
walking around the room. "Sit down and let us talk," said little Dorrit. "Tell me what you mean."
"My dear,"
said Fanny, kissing her,
"in spite of our money, we have disadvantages in this world. We are newcomers into fashionable life."
"No one would see that in you, Fanny," said little Dorrit.
"My dear child," said Fanny, "it's most kind of you to say so. But although father is very gentlemanly, he is in many small ways different from other gentlemen of his fortune. Uncle Frederick is completely unpresentable, and Edward spends far too much money in a way that is giving him a bad name. Therefore, I find myself trying to decide whether I should carry the family through."
"How?" asked her sister anxiously.
"The Myrtles are a very good connection,"
Fanny told little Dorrit.
"Mr. Sparkler has now got an excellent position, and although he is not clever, I doubt very much whether a clever husband would be suitable for me." "Oh, my dear Fanny!"
A kind of terror was coming over little Dorrit as she began to understand her sister.
"You know that you have qualities to make you the wife of a much better man than Mr. Sparkler. If you loved someone, Fanny, you would forget yourself." "Oh, indeed!" cried Fanny. "Really? You know all about it, do you? Well, I won't marry Mr. Sparkler tonight, my dear, or tomorrow morning. But I want a better position in society."
She began to walk around the room again.
"My dear sister," said little Dorrit anxiously, "would you give yourself an unhappy life just to have a better position in society?" "It wouldn't be an unhappy life, Amy. It's the life that I am fitted for."
She gave a short laugh.
"Don't argue with me. I understand these matters much better than you do. Now we have talked this over comfortably, we can go to bed. You dear little creature. Good night."
After this conversation, little Dorrit watched Fanny's behaviour towards Mr. Sparkler carefully. There were times when she became sharply impatient with him, and there were times when they got on much better, and when he amused her. He followed her through rough and smooth, like a small boat that is pulled through the water by a much larger ship. One sunny afternoon, as little Dorrit sat at the window looking down at the street, Fanny came into the room and sat next to her.
"Well, Amy dear, I am engaged to Mr. Sparkler. We must tell father tonight. Very little more needs to be said."
The two sisters put their arms around each other and cried. It was the last time Fanny showed her feelings about the marriage. From that hour, the path she had chosen was before her, and she walked it with her own proud step. Mr. Dorrit received the news of his daughter's engagement with great dignity. He told Fanny that he was proud of her. She was a child who was aware of the honour of the family name. Mr. Dorrit expressed his delight that a family connection had been opened with Mr. Myrtle, the leading light of the age. Fanny and Mr. Sparkler were married in the spring, as Mr. Sparkler's job at the Circumlocution Office was beginning soon. The night after their wedding, when the newly married couple had left for a holiday in Florence, little Dorrit sat in her room, feeling lonely. She wished that she could make her father's supper and sit by him, quietly sewing. But that could no longer happen. There was an Italian cook in the kitchen, and servants always nearby.
"Amy, my dear," said Mr. Dorrit after supper, "today has greatly pleased me. Your sister has made a very good marriage. My love, I hope soon a suitable partner will be found for you."
"Oh, no," cried little Dorrit in alarm. "I want to stay and take care of you always."
"I have no gentleman in mind at present, but soon we must find you a suitable husband. Good night, my dear daughter."
Mr. Dorrit travelled with Mr. and Mrs. Sparkler from Florence to London. He took a room in a hotel in Brook Street, Grosvenor Square, and was having breakfast there one morning in his dressing gown, when a servant came in and said that Mr. Merdle had come to see him.
"Mr. Merdle, this is... thank you," said Mr. Dorrit, jumping up.
He trembled to speak to the great man. Mr. Merdle was a quiet man with a big head and a rather uneasy expression on his dull red face. He was silent for a while, then he finally said, "I am glad to see you, sir." He sat down and passed his great hand over his exhausted head. "I hope you will have dinner with me today, and every day during your stay in town." Mr. Dorrit was delighted by the invitation.
"I am here only a fortnight, to meet you and to arrange my fortune in the best way."
"Well, sir," said Mr. Merdle, "if I can be of any use to you, please ask me."
"I did not dare to hope for your advice," said Mr. Dorrit, "though I would, of course, have followed it."
"You know we are almost relations, sir," said Mr. Merdle, curiously interested in the pattern of the carpet, "and, therefore, please consider me at your service."
"Thank you," cried Mr. Dorrit. "You are very good."
"Of course, everything must be done honestly and properly."
"Of course,"
said Mr. Dorrit. There was calm and silence in the room. Mr. Merdle passed his hand again and again over his forehead. "My time is rather precious," said the great man, suddenly getting up. "I must be moving toward the city. Can I take you anywhere, sir?" As Mr. Dorrit's bank was in the city, he accepted the invitation eagerly, and when he had dressed, he took Mr. Merdle's arm and went down the stairs of the hotel and into the great man's coach. It was a wonderful dream to Mr. Dorrit to ride through the streets of London with the light of Mr. Merdle shining around him. And then, when Mr. Merdle got out and insisted that Mr. Dorrit continue in his coach to the bank, Mr. Dorrit heard everywhere, with the ears of his mind, "Look at that wonderful man, Mr. Merdle's friend." After that, dinner invitations to Mr. Dorrit came every hour of the day. As the friend and relation by marriage of the famous Mr. Merdle, everybody wanted to know him. Mr. Dorrit felt more and more that this connection had brought him the position in society he deserved. Chapter 4. A Wounded Mind. Mr. Dorrit's time in London soon came to an end. After a last dinner at Mr. Merdle's, he said goodbye to Fanny and was then led from the house to his coach by the great man himself. His heart was still full with pride from this final honour when he arrived at his hotel. He was walking through the hall with a calm sense of excellence when he saw something that stopped him dead. Young John Chivery, in his best clothes, with his tall hat under his arm. Mr. Dorrit stood, horrified for a few moments. "Ah, John!" he gasped at last, turning to the hotel servants. "The young man may come up. Let him follow me." Young John followed Mr. Dorrit to his rooms, smiling and pleased with his welcome. The servants lit the candles and left the room. When they were safely alone, Mr. Dorrit turned around angrily towards John and caught hold of his collar. "Now, sir, what do you mean by this? How dare you come here? How dare you insult me?" Young John had expected Mr. Dorrit to put his arms around him, and his face was a picture of astonishment and horror. "I beg you to forgive me, sir," said young John, moving away towards the door. "Stop, sir!" cried Mr. Dorrit. "Stop! Sit down!" Young John dropped into the chair nearest the door, and Mr. Dorrit walked up and down the room, rapidly at first, then more slowly. Then he turned and asked, "Why did you come here?" "Only to say, sir, that I hope you are well, and only to ask if Miss Amy is well." "What's that to you?" asked Mr. Dorrit. "It's nothing to me, sir. I know there is a distance between us, I'm sure. I never thought you would take it badly," said young John, his voice trembling. Mr. Dorrit was ashamed. He went back to the window and stood there for a while with his forehead against the glass. When he turned at last, he looked tired and ill. "John, I'm very sorry that I was angry with you, but some memories aren't happy, and you shouldn't have come. I would like to send a little something with you to be divided among them. Will you take it? There's many of them, I'm sure, who would be grateful." Mr. Dorrit's hand shook, so it took him a long time to write a cheque for £100. "I hope you'll forget what has happened, John," said Mr. Dorrit, putting the cheque in John's hand. "Don't speak of it, sir," said John. But his words did not bring back the colour to Mr. Dorrit's face. "And, John," said Mr. Dorrit, "I hope that you won't say to anyone in the hotel that, once I promise you, sir," said young John. "In my poor way, sir, I'm too proud and honourable to talk about those things." But Mr. Dorrit was not too proud and honourable to listen at the door, to hear whether young John went straight out or stayed to talk with anyone. There was no doubt that he left the hotel at once and went away down the street with a quick step. And Mr. Dorrit was able to sit quietly alone with his face to the fire. The next morning's sun saw Mr. Dorrit on the dusty Dover road, and the following day saw him at Calais. With the channel between himself and young John Chivery, he began to feel safe, and to find that the foreign air was lighter to breathe than the air of England. It was late when Mr. Dorrit's coach, on its last tired journey, arrived several days later at the hotel in Rome. Leaving the servants to unload the coach, Mr. Dorrit went up the grand stairs slowly, feeling very tired, and looked into several rooms until he saw a light. As he stopped at the open door, he felt a pain in his heart. Surely it was not jealousy. There were his brother and his daughter. Frederick was near the fire, and little Dorrit was sitting at a table, sewing. Mr. Dorrit had sat many times, like his brother did now, in front of a fire far away, and she had sat with him. But surely there was nothing to feel jealous of in the memory of that old miserable poverty. "Do you know, Uncle, I think you're growing young again," little Dorrit was saying. "So cheerful and so interested in everything." "My dear child, all you have done me so much good looking after me," said her uncle. He looked up and saw Mr. Dorrit standing in the doorway. "Ah, why, here's your father, Amy. My dear William, welcome back." With a cry of pleasure, little Dorrit put her arms around her father and kissed him again and again. Her father was a little impatient. "It appears you were not expecting me. I began to think I needed to apologize for returning." "Dear father, you shall have supper in a very few minutes," said little Dorrit. "You look tired." "You're wrong," said Mr. Dorrit quickly. "I'm not tired. I'm very much fresher than I was when I went to England." He was almost angry, so little Dorrit said no more, but stayed quietly beside him, holding his arm. As Mr. Dorrit stood like this, he fell into a heavy sleep for just a few moments, then woke suddenly. "Frederick," he said, turning on his brother, "I recommend you to go to bed immediately. You should have been in bed long ago." Well, I suppose I should," said the old man. Mr. Dorrit had fallen asleep again before his brother left the room. His supper was brought and put on the table, and little Dorrit sat at his side and poured out his drink for him, for the first time since they had left the Marshalsea. She was afraid to look at him much, but she noticed that twice he looked around him, and she thought that he almost seemed surprised that they were not in the old prison room. Both times he put his hand to his head, and little Dorrit thought that perhaps he was trying to feel the old black cap which he had always worn in the Marshalsea. Over the next 2 days, Mr. Dorrit fell asleep several times during meals. On the evening of the second day, he and little Dorrit were both invited to Mrs. Merdle's for dinner. Little Dorrit was dressed and ready before her father appeared, looking very old and thin, and she went with him with an anxious heart. Mrs. Merdle welcomed them with great honour. It was a grand dinner with many important guests. The table was long, and the meal was long, and little Dorrit lost sight of her father until a servant came to her with a note from Mrs. Merdle. "Please come and speak to Mr. Dorrit," the note read. "He's not well." Little Dorrit was hurrying to her father when he got up out of his chair and called to her, "Amy! Amy, my child!" Immediately conversation stopped, and there was silence in the grand room. "Amy," he repeated, "please see if Chivery is at the gate. Of all the jailers, Chivery is a friend." "Dear father, I am here," said little Dorrit, gently trying to move him away from the table. "I can't get up the stairs without Chivery," he said, annoyed. All the guests were now talking in confusion, and everyone stood up. Mr. Dorrit looked around him, and seeing so many faces, spoke to them.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my duty to welcome you to the Marshalsea. Welcome to the Marshalsea. Those who live here call me the father of the Marshalsea. This is my child, ladies and gentlemen, my daughter, born here.
Little Dorrit was not ashamed of him. She was pale and frightened, but she only wanted to calm him and get him away. Her quiet voice was heard gently begging him to leave the room with her. Mrs. Merdle, horrified, had managed to get the other guests out of the room, and little Dorrit was left alone with her father. "Come with me now, father," she said gently. But no, he said he would never get up the stairs without Chivery. Where was Chivery? Would no one fetch Chivery? "Let's go and look for Mr. Chivery," she suggested, and so she got him outside into a coach and home. Back at the hotel, little Dorrit and Frederick took Mr. Dorrit upstairs to his room and laid him down on his bed. His poor wounded mind had forgotten the dream that it had been living since the discovery of the Dorrit's fortune, and it now knew of nothing except the Marshalsea. The child who had done so much for him was never out of his mind. He loved little Dorrit in his old way. They were in prison again, and she looked after him, and he needed her constantly. As for her, she bent over his bed with her quiet face against his, and would have laid down her life to make him better. For 10 days, little Dorrit cared for him. Sometimes she was so exhausted that for a few minutes she would sleep with her head beside his. He became extremely weak, and then, quietly, he floated into rest. Frederick and little Dorrit, silent and sad together, stayed with the body until midnight, and then little Dorrit took her uncle to his room and saw him lie down. She fell on her own bed, exhausted, and went into a deep sleep. The moon rose late that night. When it was high in the sky, it shone through the window into the room where a life had just ended, and it shone not on one, but on 2 quiet figures. Frederick Dorrit had gone back into the room and, kneeling on the floor, had bent his face over his brother's hand and there taken his last breath. Both brothers lay still, removed from the busy earth and far beyond the judgments of this world, high above its mists and confusions. Chapter 5. Ruined. Mr. Edmund Sparkler and his wife Fanny were now living in their own house. It was a small, inconvenient house, but it was in a good area of London. Fanny, when she heard about the deaths of her father and uncle, had cried violently for 12 hours. Then she had got up to decide which new black dresses she was going to wear. One hot summer evening, about 3 months later, Fanny lay on the sofa in her sitting room. She looked through the open window, over boxes of flowers, across the narrow street, at the open window of the house opposite. She was tired of that view. She looked at her husband, who was standing at the other window. She was tired of that view, too.
"If you have anything to say, Edmund, why don't you say it?" said Fanny impatiently.
Mr. Sparkler came across the room and stood by his wife's side.
"You make my head ache, Edmund," said Fanny. "You look so annoyingly large. Do sit down."
"Certainly, my dear," said Mr. Sparkler, and sat down.
"This day feels like the longest day ever," said Fanny, yawning. "I've never experienced such a long day. Edmund, we must not be alone any more. I really cannot and will not have another day like this."
"No, dear," said Mr. Sparkler. "But, of course, once your brother is better, you will soon have your sister Amy."
"Dearest Amy, yes," cried Fanny. "Poor little Amy will no doubt have felt father's loss deeply. I have felt it myself, terribly, of course, but she was with him to the end, which I, unhappily, was not. Dear, dear father, what a gentleman he was."
There was a long, low knock on the door downstairs, and a few moments later, a servant brought Mr. Merdle into the room. "I was out for a walk, and I thought I'd visit you," he said, passing his hand over his yellow forehead. "I was going out to dinner with Mrs. Merdle, but I didn't want to eat, so Mrs. Merdle went on in the coach." He sat down on the chair which Mr. Sparkler had offered him.
"Thank you," said Fanny. "You don't often visit people. You're too busy for that. But you must eat. You must not be ill."
"Oh, I'm as well as I usually am," replied Mr. Merdle, and then became silent again.
"I was just speaking about poor father," began Fanny. She felt she had to continue the conversation. "My brother has been ill, and that has delayed arranging father's fortune."
Yes, said Mr. Merdle. "There has been a delay." He looked exhausted. He passed his hand over his head again.
"Will you meet Mrs. Merdle and take the coach home?" asked Fanny. Conversation with Mr. Merdle was so difficult.
"No," he answered. "I shall walk home, and leave Mrs. Merdle to take care of herself." He looked closely at his hands. There was then a long silence. Fanny, lying on her sofa, shut her eyes. "I thought I'd visit you," said Mr. Merdle.
"Thank you,"
said Fanny weakly. "However, I shall go now," said Mr. Merdle, getting up. "Could you lend me a penknife?"
Fanny smiled. "How strange! You're a man of business, Mr. Merdle. You must have a knife to open all your letters."
"Yes," agreed Mr. Merdle. "You shall have it back tomorrow."
"Edmund," said Fanny, "open the wooden box on my little table and give Mr. Merdle the tortoise-shell penknife."
Mr. Sparkler opened the box and gave Mr. Merdle the penknife. The famous visitor shook hands gently with Mrs. Sparkler and went out of the room with Mr. Sparkler. After a moment, Mrs. Sparkler got up and went to the window for a breath of air. She was sure that it was the longest day ever, and she was tired of fools. Tears of annoyance filled her eyes as she watched the great Mr. Merdle walk away down the street. The news that Mr. Merdle was dead spread through London with surprising speed. At first, he was dead of all the diseases that had ever been known. He had had a problem with his heart, some said, or water on his chest, others thought. But by lunchtime, people were whispering all over London that Mr. Merdle had killed himself. Soon, everybody knew that he had been found at the public baths shortly before midnight the night before, a tortoise-shell penknife by his side. As the day passed, the talk changed again. Mr. Merdle had never had any money of his own. He had spent other people's money, lots of it, and without any care. By evening, everyone knew that the great Mr. Merdle had been a thief. The man who had been honoured by the great, who had advised government officials, who had been invited to important dinners, respected by all society, was simply the greatest thief who had ever cheated the nation. The next morning, Panks rushed into Arthur's office. The talk of the day before had become public. Mr. Merdle's bank was broken. The usual work of Arthur's office had stopped. Arthur sat, with his arms on the desk, his head buried in his hands. Panks stood at the door of the office. "I persuaded you to do it, Mr. Clennam," he said at last. "I know it. Say anything you want. You can't say more than I'm thinking myself." "Oh, Panks, Panks," said Arthur. "I have ruined Doyce. That honest, tireless man who has worked hard all his life. The man who, in spite of so much disappointment, has kept such a good and hopeful nature. The man who trusted me to be his partner. I intended to be so true and useful to him. I have ruined him." Panks held his head in his hands and started tearing at his hair in a cruel manner. "Blame me!" he cried. "Say, you fool, you criminal!" If we had never talked about Mr. Merdle, it would have been so much better for you, Panks, and so much better for me. "Mr. Clennam, did you put everything into Merdle's bank?" "Everything," said Clennam, wiping away the tears that had been silently dropping down his face. "I must give up the management of the business. I must save Doyce's name. The sooner the business goes out of my hands, the better. I must keep nothing for myself. I must work to pay him back as much as I can for the rest of my life." "Is it not possible, sir, to wait for a while and see if things get better?" asked Panks. "Impossible, Panks," said Arthur. "All last night I thought about what I would do, and now I just have to do it." "I have a friend who is a lawyer, Mr. Clennam. May I fetch him for you?" "If you can spare the time, Panks, I would be most grateful." With the help of Panks's lawyer friend, Arthur wrote to all his creditors, informing them that his partner was innocent and that he, Arthur, was wholly to blame for what had happened. He gave his small private savings to pay some of the debts. But a few days later, the creditors' lawyers came to Arthur's office to take him to the debtors' prison. "Now, you know what the Marshalsea is," said his lawyer. "Small rooms, very crowded. You would be much better in the King's Bench." "I would rather go to the Marshalsea," said Arthur, "than to any other prison." When their coach arrived outside the high walls of the Marshalsea, Mr. Chivery was waiting at the gate, and young John too. They were astonished to see who the new prisoner was. "I don't remember, sir, that I was ever less glad to see you," said Mr. Chivery, shaking hands with Arthur. Arthur sat in the gaoler's room by the gate, his eyes fixed on the floor, until young John touched him on the shoulder and said, "You can come now." Arthur got up and followed young John, through the old door, up the old stairs, and into the old room. "I thought you'd like this room, so here it is for you," said young John, and he turned and left. When he was gone, Arthur thought of the good, gentle creature who had spent so much time in this room. He wished with all his heart that he could see her face, full of love and truth. He turned against the wall, and as the tears rolled down his face, he cried, "Oh, my little Dorrit!" Chapter 6. A New Prisoner. The day was sunny, and the Marshalsea, with the hot sun shining on it, was unusually quiet. Arthur dropped into the only armchair in the room and sat thinking. In the unnatural peace of the prison, his thoughts returned constantly to little Dorrit, and how much the dear creature had influenced his better decisions. The door opened, and Mr. Chivery came in. "Excuse me for opening the door, sir, but I couldn't make you hear." "Did you knock?" said Arthur. 6 times or more." Looking up, Arthur realised that it was late in the afternoon. He had been thinking for hours. "Your things have come," said Mr. Chivery. "Young John will bring them up for you now. Can I do anything for you?" "Many thanks. Nothing." Mr. Chivery went out and shut the door, and 10 minutes later his son carried Arthur's box of personal things into his room. "Thank you," said Arthur. "It's very kind of you." He put out his hand, but young John moved away. "I don't think I can shake your hand," he said. "No, I find I can't." Arthur looked at him, puzzled. "Why are you angry with me?" he said. "If I've done anything to offend you, I'm sorry." "I'd rather not talk about it, sir," said young John. But after a moment, he said softly, "The furniture in this room belongs to me. You're welcome to it. And that little round table belonged to the great gentleman who recently died." They were both silent. It was young John again who spoke. "How long do you intend to go without food and drink, sir?" "I'm not hungry just now," replied Arthur. "The more reason you should eat, sir," said John. "I'm going to have tea in my room. Please come and drink a cup with me." Arthur stood up and followed young John to his room. It was little Dorrit's old room, now repainted and more comfortably furnished, but Arthur remembered it clearly from that day when the Dorrits had left the prison forever, and he had lifted her unconscious body from the floor. Young John looked hard at Arthur. "I see you remember the room, Mr. Clennam." "I remember it well." Young John began to make tea, while Arthur stood at the window. The room spoke to him so sadly of little Dorrit. He laid his hand on the wall gently, and imagined that he touched her. He spoke her name in a low voice. He looked out of the window at the spikes on the walls, and imagined her in that distant land where she was rich and successful. Young John put bread, butter, cold meat and fresh vegetables on the table, and poured the tea. Arthur tried to eat, but the meat sickened him, and the bread seemed to turn to sand in his mouth. He could only drink a cup of tea. Young John watched him. "Why not take care of yourself?" "Truly," said Arthur with a sad smile, "I have no one to take care of myself for." "Well, sir," said young John hotly, "I am surprised that an honest gentleman can give me an answer like that. Really and truly, I am surprised." Young John stood up and then sat down again, never taking his eyes off Arthur. "Why did I get you the room that you'd like best? Why did I give you my furniture? Why did I carry up your things? Not because of your own goodness, no, but because of someone else's goodness." "What is this, John? What can you mean?" cried Arthur. "I tell you, I do not understand." Young John stood staring angrily at Arthur for a moment. Then slowly, his disbelieving face softened into a face of doubt. "Mr. Clennam," he said, looking at Arthur thoughtfully, "do you mean that you don't know?" "What, John?" Young John stood up and went over to the window. "This room, this window, that wall, have all been witnesses of it, from day to day, week to week, month to month." "Witnesses of what?" said Arthur. "Of Miss Dorrit's love." "For whom?" "You," said young John. And he touched Arthur lightly on the shoulder, and then sat down again, with a pale face, shaking his head. Arthur was shocked. He looked at young John, and his hands dropped at his sides. His whole appearance was of a man who has been woken from sleep. "Me," he said at last, trying to smile. "You're completely mistaken." "Oh!" gasped young John. "I'm mistaken, sir? No, Mr. Clennam, don't tell me that. It's nearly killed me with pain. Don't tell me that I'm mistaken." He wiped his eyes as tears rolled down his face. Arthur could not speak. At last, he went slowly back to his room and sat down in the old armchair, putting his head between his hands. Little Dorrit loved him. Dear little Dorrit. He had always called her child, and had told her that he felt he was getting old. But perhaps she had not thought of him as old. Was there something on his own side that he had quietened as it rose in him? He took out her letter from his box and read it again. He seemed to hear her voice in the words. Had he whispered to himself that he must not think of her loving him? That he must remember that the time had passed him by and he was too saddened and old? Looking back at his own poor story, he saw that little Dorrit was the centre of his every interest. When she had left England, everything that was good and pleasant in his life had gone, and beyond there was nothing but a darkened sky. He thought of this as he lay down to sleep inside the grey walls of the Marshalsea, and all night the thoughts went around his head. Little Dorrit was in Arthur's mind constantly after this, but he was not strong enough to guard against misery. He stayed inside his room and was too depressed to make friends with the other prisoners, who did not trust him. Night after night, unable to sleep, he sat at his window, watching the lamps in the yard and looking upwards for the first sight of day. A burning restlessness built up inside him, and a belief that he was going to break his own heart and die in prison. He hated the prison so much that sometimes he could hardly breathe, and he stood at the window gasping. After a few weeks, he developed a low, slow fever. He was responsible for the failure of Doyce's business, and memories of his foolishness never left his mind. Mr. Plornish visited him with a basket of food, but Arthur did not want to see him, and wrote to ask him not to come again. Young John looked in every day, but Arthur always pretended to be busy writing. On a hot, misty morning, Arthur watched the night end, listening to the rain falling on the yard with an aching head and a tired heart. He felt so ill that he had to rest many times as he washed himself and got back to his chair by the open window. He sat, half sleeping and dreaming. He heard music and songs which he knew were not real. He began to sleep an exhausted sleep, and he heard voices and answered them. Then he began to dream of a garden of flowers in a soft, warm wind. Painfully, he lifted his head and saw some wonderful flowers by the teacup on his table. A handful of the most lovely flowers. Nothing had ever appeared so beautiful to him. He took them up and smelled them and lifted them to his hot head. He wondered who had sent them. He tried to drink some tea, but the smell of it was horrible. He began to dream again, and in his dream, music was playing softly, and the door of his room seemed to open to a light touch. After a moment's pause, a quiet figure seemed to stand there with a black cloak. It seemed to drop the cloak on the floor, and then it seemed to be his little Dorrit in her old shabby dress. It seemed to tremble and to smile, and then to burst into tears. He tried to wake up properly and cried out. And then she came towards him, and with her tears dropping on him as the rain had dropped upon the flowers, little Dorrit knelt on the floor beside his chair. "Oh, my best friend, dear Mr. Clennam, I have come back." So gentle and true, and unchanged by fortune. "They never told me you were ill," she said. Little Dorrit put a hand upon his head and nursed him as she had nursed her father when she was just a child. When Arthur could speak, he said, "You have really come to me, and in this dress." "I hoped you would like me better in this dress. I've always kept it near me to remind me," she said softly. "It was only yesterday evening that I came to London with my brother. Then I heard that you were here. I was thinking of you so anxiously, and it seemed so long until morning. Did you think of me a little?" "I have thought of you, little Dorrit, every day, every hour, every minute since I have been here." "Have you? Have you?" He saw the bright delight of her face, and he felt ashamed. He, a broken, poor, sick prisoner. Little Dorrit unpacked a basket that she had brought with her. There were cool drinks, pieces of chicken and fruit. Then she sat next to him, sewing a curtain for his window. She often looked up at him as he lay back in his chair watching her. Words could not express how dearly he loved her now. She would not let him speak, but now and again she got up to give him a drink. The sun went down, and she was still there. She finished her work and put her hand on the arm of his chair. "Dear Mr. Clennam, I must say something to you before I go. I am not going abroad again. My brother has come home with me to see my dear father's lawyers and bankers. I shall be rich, but I have no use for money. I have no wish for it. Will you let me give you all I have? I've never forgotten your kindness to me when this prison was my home. Dear Mr. Clennam, make me happy and let me help you." He softly answered her, "No, dear little Dorrit, I must not hear of such an idea. I can never accept it. I will never touch your fortune, never. I am not desperate enough to carry you, so generous, so good, down with me. The bell began to ring, warning visitors to leave. One other word, my little Dorrit. A hard one to me, but it is a necessary one. The time when you belonged to this prison has long gone by. Oh, don't tell me that I must not come back any more, she cried. I am not brave enough to say that, but do not come again soon. Do not come often. You belong to much brighter and better places. Little Dorrit left Arthur and slowly crossed the yard. The gate shut heavily and hopelessly behind her. At midnight, young John came to see Arthur. I walked Miss Dorrit to her hotel, sir, he said. Thank you, thank you. She gave me a message for you. Young John hesitated and took a deep breath. Promise to take care of him when I'm not there. Tell him that I send him my undying love. That's what she said. There's my hand, sir, and I'll stand by you forever. Chapter 7. Unfinished Business. One evening, when the sun was low, Rigaud turned in at the gate of the old house and knocked loudly at the door. Mr. Flintwinch opened the door, and the two men went upstairs to Mrs. Clennam's quiet room. The window was wide open, and Affery sat near it, sewing. "Affery, my woman," said Mr. Flintwinch, "take yourself away." Affery threw her sewing down and stood up. "No, I won't. I'll stay here and hear everything. I will." Mr. Flintwinch, stiffening with anger and astonishment, began to move across the room towards her. "Don't come near me," cried Affery. "I'll throw myself out of the window. I'll scream." "Stop," said Mrs. Clennam, but Mr. Flintwinch had stopped already. "Leave her alone. Affery, do you turn against me after these many years?" "I do, yes. I will stay to hear what I don't know. I turn against both of you, and I won't be frightened any more. I won't. I'm here to serve Mr. Clennam when he has nothing left, and is ill and in prison, and can't be here." After looking at her in silence, Mrs. Clennam turned to Rigaud. "You see and hear this foolish creature. Do you mind if she remains here?" "Aye, madam. Do I? That's a question for you." "I do not," she said. Rigaud sat on the table and stretched his legs. He looked at Mrs. Clennam, with his moustache going up and his nose coming down. "Madame," he began, "we have a little business to finish. You must understand first that I am a gentleman who enjoys money. You follow me?" "Yes," said Mrs. Clennam. "I am the softest and sweetest of gentlemen. But when people try to play games with me, I become terribly angry. And when that happens, feeding my anger is as important to me as money. Now, let me remind you about our first two meetings." "It is not necessary," said Mrs. Clennam. "Ah, but I want to, and it clears the way. The first time I came here, I was able to look at one or two things in the house. They proved to me that I had found the lady I was looking for, I told our dear Mr. Flintwinch that I would return, and return I did. The second time, I told you that I had something to sell, which, if not bought, would put Madam in a difficult position. I asked for, I think, £1,000. Will you correct me?" Forced to speak, she replied, "You asked for £1,000. Now I ask for 2. That is the problem with delaying. So now, madam, I am here for the last time. The last." "I tell you again, as I told you before, that we are not rich here, as you suppose," said Mrs. Clennam. "You told me that you have some papers, and I wish to get those papers back from you. The papers might be worth some money to me." "How much then, madam? Tell me." He turned on her suddenly, with a threatening movement of his hand, seeming to want to hit her. "I cannot say how much they are worth until I know exactly what they are." "You have no fear," said Rigaud. "I am very determined," Mrs. Clennam replied. Rigaud got off the table and sat down near her sofa. "Let me tell you a little family history then. A history of a strange marriage and a strange mother, and of revenge. Yes, yes, I think your heart is beating a little faster, madam. So let me begin this little history. An uncle and his nephew live here, in this house. The uncle is a strong-minded old gentleman. The nephew is shy and frightened." Affery was trembling from head to foot. "Yes, that's Arthur's father and his uncle," she cried out. "Arthur's father couldn't even choose his own wife. His uncle chose her." Rigaud nodded his head at Affery. "Perfectly right, Mrs. Flintwinch. The uncle tells the nephew to marry. He finds for him a determined lady, a strong lady, a lady without love, cold as stone." Mrs. Clennam's face had changed, and there was an extraordinary colour in it. "Madam, I see that I interest you. Let us go on. The nephew does as he is told, but one day the lady discovers a terrible secret about her husband. Full of anger, full of jealousy, she plans a revenge. Because the secret is that her husband has—" Mrs. Clennam was breathing harder, and her lips were trembling. "Her husband has—" Rigaud went on. "What does her husband have? Say then, madam." The frozen expression of Mrs. Clennam's face was suddenly torn away. She burst out, "I will tell it myself. I will not hear it from your lips. Since it must be seen, let it be seen by the light I stood in." Rigaud pushed his chair back and sat listening to her. "You don't know what it is to be a child in a house without love," she said. "My childhood was one of fear and punishment. I was taught to have a terror of doing wrong. My father wanted me to marry my husband because he was a serious, hard-working young man. I agreed, because I always obeyed my father. But after a year, I discovered that my husband had been secretly married to another woman and had a child with her. He loved a young girl, a poor singer." Mrs. Clennam put her hand on the watch on her table. "Do not forget.
Those were the words of that other woman. She gave this watch to my husband when they separated.
More than 40 years had passed over the grey head of Mrs. Clennam since the time she was remembering. 40 years of suffering and anger.
I forced my husband to tell me the woman's name and address, and I went to see her. I accused her, and she fell at my feet, hiding her face. Mrs. Clennam went on, burning with anger. She told me how young she was, how difficult my husband's life had been, and how ashamed they both were. And what did I ask? What was the punishment I asked from her? You have a child. I have none. You love that child. Give him to me. He will believe that he is my son, and everyone will believe that he is mine. His father will promise never to see you again, and you will promise never to communicate with either him or your son. That was all. She picked up the watch from the table, opened it, and looked at the letters inside. They did not forget. If Arthur was a daily reminder to his father, and if Arthur's absence was a daily pain to his mother, that was only fair. I raised her lost, trembling boy in fear, and he paid the price for the wrongs that were heavy on his head before he was even born. When Arthur's father died, he sent this watch back to me with its "Do not forget."
Rigaud shook his head impatiently.
Come, madame, come to the stolen money. Come straight to the stolen money, or I will. It was not for the money, you fool.
Mrs. Clennam moved in her chair and almost tried to stand up.
At the end of his life, my husband's uncle, in a moment of weakness, wrote a new will, leaving some money to Arthur's mother.
Rigaud clapped his hands in her face.
£1,000 was supposed to go to Arthur's mother, he said. Or, if she was dead, £1,000 to the daughter of her patron. Or, if he had none, to the youngest niece of her patron. And that patron was Mr. Frederick Dorrit. That Frederick Dorrit, said Mrs. Clennam. He kept a house for singers and players when he was young and healthy. He raised that poor girl because she could sing. And then Arthur's father met her. So, yes, I kept that new will a secret, and kept it here with me in this house for many years. I did not bring it to light because it rewarded wrongdoing. It was a moment of madness by my husband's uncle. When the will was at last destroyed, as I thought, Frederick Dorrit had long been ruined. He had no daughter. I had found the youngest niece, little Dorrit, and what I did for her was much better than money.
And now I have the will, said Rigaud. Mrs. Clennam and Mr. Flintwinch stared at each other. At last, still staring at her, old Mr. Flintwinch spoke.
When you told me about that will, I advised you to destroy it. But no, you wanted to keep it. You hid that paper away until we were expecting Arthur home any day. He had not been back in this room 10 minutes when he spoke of his father's watch. So I put the will in a box, locked it, and gave it to my brother, who came here that night on his way to Antwerp. The next day, you asked me to burn it, but my brother had already taken it with him. Where I met him, laughed Rigaud. So tired after his long journey that he slept like a baby, and never even noticed when I took the paper from him."
Mrs. Clennam dropped her head in her hand. Her other hand pushed hard on the table, and again she seemed almost ready to stand up.
"I do not have £2,000 to give you now," she said to Rigo. "What will you take for your silence?"
"My sweet lady," said Rigo, "I have given a copy of the will to another. If you delay until the Marshalsea gate is shut tonight, your son Arthur will have read it." She put her 2 hands to her head, let out a loud cry, and pulled herself to her feet. For a moment, her body shook, but then she stood strong.
"Say what you mean. Say what you mean, man."
"Before I came here tonight, I gave a copy of the will to Miss Dorrit, the little niece of Mr. Frederick, who I met abroad. Unless someone takes it back before the Marshalsea bell rings tonight, she will give it to your son." Nearly falling again, Mrs. Clennam ran to a cupboard, violently pulled the door open, and took out a cloak. Affery, who had watched her in terror, ran to the middle of the room and caught hold of her dress. "Don't! Don't! Where are you going? I'll keep your secret. Don't go out. You'll fall dead in the street. Tell me where you've kept Arthur's poor mother, and I'll nurse her." Mrs. Clennam looked at Affery in astonishment.
"Kept her?" she said. "She's been dead for 20 years. Ask Flintwinch. He'll tell you that she died when Arthur went abroad."
Affery trembled. "What is it in the house, then? What is it that makes the noises and shakes the dust?" Mrs. Clennam did not listen to her.
"Wait here until I come back,"
she said to Rigo, and ran out of the house and then wildly through the gate and into the street. For a moment, the others stood still. Affery was the first to move. She ran downstairs and outside, following Mrs. Clennam. Next, Mr. Flintwinch went slowly to the door in his sideways manner, without a word. Rigo was left alone. He sat by the window. "You will get your money," he said to himself. "You have lived a gentleman, you will die a gentleman." Chapter 8. Sunshine and Shade. The summer sun was going down behind the houses, and the streets were beginning to darken, as a woman, dressed in black, and with a pale, wild face, walked through the streets. She moved rapidly, but was weak and uncertain. People stopped to look at her as she rushed by. She crossed the bridge and arrived at last at the gate of the Marshalsea.
"I would like to see Miss Dorrit. Is she here?"
"Yes, she is," said Mr. Chivery. "Can I ask your name, madam?"
"Mrs. Clennam."
"Mr. Clennam's mother?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded, and he took her upstairs to a room where she could wait. The room looked down into the darkening yard, where prisoners were walking slowly around, talking to friends. The air was heavy and hot, and from outside there was a rush of sounds. Mrs. Clennam stood at the window until she heard a soft word of surprise, and little Dorrit stood before her. "Is it possible, Mrs. Clennam? You are better," said little Dorrit. Then she stopped, for there was neither happiness nor health in the face that turned to her.
"I've come to collect some papers that were left with you," said Mrs. Clennam anxiously.
Little Dorrit took out the packet.
"Have you read the papers inside?"
Frightened by her being there, like a picture that had come to life, Little Dorrit answered, "No."
"Read them."
Little Dorrit opened the packet and stood by the window to read the papers, crying out a few times in terror and astonishment. When she had finished, she looked around at Mrs. Clennam.
"You know now what I have done," said Mrs. Clennam.
"I think so. I'm afraid so. But I feel so sorry and so full of pity that I can't follow all I've read," said Little Dorrit, trembling.
"I will give back what I owe you. Forgive me." "Can you forgive me?"
Mrs. Clennam knelt down. "I can, and I do. I forgive you freely. Please get up. You are too old to kneel. Let me help you." Little Dorrit took Mrs. Clennam's hands and helped her to stand.
"I have something to ask," said Mrs. Clennam. "I beg you not to tell Arthur about this until I am dead."
"I'm so sorry, and my thoughts are confused," said Little Dorrit. "But if I'm sure that knowing this will do Mr. Clennam no good, I will not tell him."
"Thank you."
Mrs. Clennam stood in the shadow, so Little Dorrit could not see her face, but her voice was strong and broken at the same time.
"You will wonder, perhaps, why I am telling you this and not him. I was always hard with Arthur. He never loved me, but he always respected me. I don't want to lose his respect while I'm alive."
Her pride was very strong, and the pain of it was sharp when she spoke. The first warning bell began to ring in the yard below.
"I have something else to ask you," cried Mrs. Clennam. "The man who brought you this packet is waiting at my house. He has threatened that you will tell Arthur everything if I don't pay him, but I do not have enough money. Will you come and tell him that you already know the truth?"
Little Dorrit agreed, and they left the prison together. It was a long, light summer evening, and the sky was calm and beautiful. People sat at their doors, playing with their children and enjoying the air. They had arrived near the gate of Mrs. Clennam's house when there was a sudden noise like thunder.
"What was that?" cried Mrs. Clennam. "Let's hurry in."
But Little Dorrit, with a sharp cry, held her back. In one quick moment, they saw the old house in front of them, with Rigo sitting at the open window upstairs. Another thundering sound, and the house moved, opened apart in 50 places, and fell slowly into ruins as they watched. Deafened by the noise, covered with the dust, they hid their faces in terror and stood unable to move. Then they ran back from the gate and towards the main road, crying and shouting. There, Mrs. Clennam dropped to the ground, and from that hour she never moved a finger again, or spoke a single word for the rest of her life. Affery had been looking for them at the prison, and she came up now to help Mrs. Clennam into a neighbour's house and to look after her. Affery had been right about her facts and wrong about the reasons for them. The noises in the old house had been the sounds of the building weakening for years, and finally it had fallen. When the great storm of dust cleared and the summer night was calm again, people came to dig through the ruins. Rigo had been killed by the falling bricks and wood. But Mr. Flintwinch was never found. Perhaps he had left the house before it fell. Perhaps he had taken as much money as he could find and escaped from London. Perhaps the reports that were heard many times of a bent old Englishman living in Amsterdam who walked sideways and looked very like Mr. Flintwinch were really true. Arthur continued to lie very ill in the Marshalsea. Little Dorrit was there every day, thinking for him, working for him, and watching him. Outside the Marshalsea, she was looking after others too. Fanny, who always wanted comfort, but was determined not to be comforted, and her brother Edward, who was weak and proud and could do nothing for himself. But at last, slowly, the Marshalsea prisoner's health began to return. One fresh autumn day, he sat weakly, listening to a voice that read to him. Outside the prison, the golden fields had been cut, and the apples were shining red among the yellowing leaves. The Marshalsea, unchanging and hard, had not a touch of these beautiful colours and richness on it. But Arthur, listening to little Dorrit, heard in her gentle voice everything that nature was doing beyond the stones and bars of the prison. When she stopped reading, little Dorrit brought her chair closer to his side. "Have you been here many times when I have not seen you, little Dorrit?" he asked. "Yes, I have been here very often," she replied. "Every day?" "I think," said little Dorrit after hesitating, "that I have been here at least twice every day." "Dear little Dorrit, we must learn to say goodbye again. You must stop coming here and go back to your own life. We must follow our different paths which lead so far apart. You haven't forgotten what we said together when you came back?" "Oh no, I haven't forgotten. But something has—" She hesitated. "You feel quite strong today, don't you? Do you feel strong enough to know what a great fortune I've got?" "I shall be very glad to know. No fortune can be too great for little Dorrit." "I've been so wanting to tell you." She looked at him silently. There was something happy and proud in her face, but he thought she might break into tears in a moment. "I must tell you about Fanny first," she said. "You will be sorry to hear that poor Fanny has lost everything. She has nothing left but her husband's income. All the money that father gave her was in Mr. Merdle's bank, and it has all gone." Arthur was more sad than surprised. "I had feared so, because of the connection between her husband and Mr. Merdle." "Yes, I am very sorry for poor Fanny. My poor brother, too, has lost his money in the same way. But how much do you think my own great fortune is?" She paused, and Arthur felt suddenly anxious. "I have nothing in the world. I am as poor as when I lived here. Father put all his money in Mr. Merdle's bank, and it has all gone. Now, my dearest Arthur, you can share my fortune." She looked up at him, and she felt his tears on her face. "We shall never say goodbye again. I never was rich before. I never was proud before.
I never was happy. I would rather spend my life here with you than have the greatest fortune ever. I love you dearly. I wish Father could know my happiness in this room where he suffered for so many years."
The autumn days went on. One morning, as Arthur listened for little Dorrit's light feet, he heard her coming, but not alone.
"Dear Arthur," said her happy voice outside the door, "you have a visitor. May I bring someone in?"
And there was Mr. Meagles, cheerful and sun-browned. He put his arms around Arthur like a father.
"Arthur, my dear man," said Mr. Meagles, "Miss Dorrit wrote to me as soon as she had seen you for the first time, but I could not come until I had found Doyce."
"Poor Doyce," sighed Arthur.
"He's not poor, he's doing well. Doyce has been very successful abroad. He's fallen on his feet. I tell you, you wouldn't believe it if you saw the wonderful things he's doing over there. He doesn't need the circumlocution office anymore. He has managed without them."
"What a load you take from my mind!" cried Arthur. "What happiness you give me!"
"Happiness?" replied Mr. Meagles. "Don't talk about happiness until you see Daniel Doyce. I went and found him out there, and so we came back together."
"Doyce in England?" gasped Arthur.
"We're both in England, and here he is," said Mr. Meagles, throwing open his arms.
Doyce ran in from behind the door and caught Arthur with both hands.
"I have 2 things to say, my dear Clennam," said Doyce. "First, not a word more from you about the past. You made a mistake, and you will learn from the failure. Every failure teaches a man something, and you are too sensible a man not to learn from this one. Secondly, I'm sorry that you felt your mistake so painfully. I've been travelling day and night to get home. Mr. Meagles and I have put the business right again, and it needs you more than ever. My dear Clennam, your old office is waiting for you. There is nothing to keep you here half an hour longer."
There was silence, which was not broken until Arthur had stood for some time at the window and little Dorrit had gone to him.
"I can see that I made a mistake when I said that there is nothing to keep you here half an hour longer," said Doyce then. "Am I right in thinking that we need to organise a wedding?"
"You are," said Arthur. And so the day ended, and then the night, and the morning came, and little Dorrit, in a simple dress, came into the prison with the sunshine. The poor prison room was a happy place that morning. Where in the world was there a room so full of quiet happiness? And so, in front of Mr. Plornish, Mr. Panks, Mr. and Mrs. Meagles, and their daughter Pet, Daniel Doyce, John Chivery and Mr. Chivery, and all the jailers from the Marshalsea, Amy and Arthur were married, with the sun shining on them. Afterwards, they paused for a moment, looking along the street in the autumn morning sunshine. Then they went down the steps into a quiet life of usefulness and happiness, to give a mother's care, in time, to Fanny's children, and to their own too, while that lady went into society every day. They went down to be a nurse and friend to Tip, who was never ashamed of the great demands he made on his sister. They went quietly down to move along the noisy streets, happy and inseparable, through sunshine and shade.